we accept that the British people rejected Jeremy Corbyn in December 2019?
No, I think what we can accept is that the British people rejected the Labour Party, and particularly its stance on Brexit in the last election. I think that the stats simply do not bear out that they rejected Jeremy Corbyn, as I've just mentioned to you.
Well, Andrew, all of the Corbynites
identified Corbyn.
Andrew, all of the Corbynites blame Brexit, and they never mentioned that Corbyn sided with Russia during the Salisbury attacks. And also,
he presided. No such thing. That's a ridiculous statement.
He said in Parliament.
Absolutely ridiculous.
Andrew, he said in Parliament.
Show me the statement.
He said in Parliament.
Show me the statement. Can I talk, or would you actually like to have a monologue?
Let me tell you.
In which case, there's no need for me to be on here.
Well, Andrew, let me tell you that he was on record as saying we should send the evidence around the Salisbury attack to Russia and let them work out who did it.
Well, that doesn't sound to me like siding with Russia. It sounds to me as suggesting that he thought Russia might have had something to do with it. And I think this is the problem of the whole issue and the whole discussion around the Labour Party, is that people in the media take certain aspects of a story and use it to their advantage. The fact that left-wing Jewish members of the Labour Party, who are not an insubstantial number, who are very supportive of Jeremy Corbyn, were supportive of his leadership, were supportive of his approach to anti-Semitism, barely appear in the mainstream media. And there's been an enormous amount of work by the media unit at Goldsmiths College that make exactly this point. Yesterday was, again, a very good point in this regard. So, you know, when it comes to should Keir Starmer kick Jeremy Corbyn out of the party permanently, I think the more appropriate question is, was Keir Starmer correct to suspend Jeremy Corbyn in the first instance from the Labour Party? And if you look at the EHRC report, which he was referencing in relation to that decision, on page 27 of that report, Article 10, it says, Article 10 will protect Labour members who, for example, express their opinions on party matters such as the scale of anti-Semitism within the party. And what Jeremy Corbyn did yesterday is he said that the scale of allegations in the public domain was exaggerated, but he didn't use the word exaggerated. I can't remember the exact word he used. So if we look at the facts of that, the reality is that a Survation poll in 2019 said that British people thought that over 200,000 members of the Labour Party, that's about 1/3 of the membership, were alleged to have done something anti-Semitic. The actual number was 2,000. So I think there is a perception that the media have been very happy to go along with around the scale of this issue and around Jeremy Corbyn's response to it. And let me state here quite clearly, as Jeremy Corbyn himself has said, one anti-Semitic member of the Labour Party is one anti-Semitic member too many. I have spent an enormous amount of my personal, political, and professional life engaged in battles against racism and anti-Semitism. I was the first ANC member of Parliament to introduce a motion on the Holocaust in the history of the South African Parliament. I have lectured at Auschwitz on genocide prevention, where my mother lost 39 members of her family. I have known Jeremy Corbyn a very long time through his anti-apartheid work in South Africa. I have never heard him make a racist or an anti-Semitic comment of any sort.
Why does he always... I think I'm really glad, Andrew, that you've identified Corbyn himself. I'm still, to this day, not convinced that he, Andrew, is an anti-Semite. But clearly, on his watch, he presided over a rump of hard-left anti-Semites within his party that he patently didn't do enough to remove. And there's some evidence that the leader's office obstructed complaints about the party. And this comes not from the gossip columns of a newspaper. It comes from the Equality and Human Rights Commission. And let's not forget, in July, Andrew, the Labour Party paid out 600 grand to 7 former employees Because
legal advice.
They were defamed. They were
so many members of the
party by the party.
Like me,
do we not believe the High Court? Are we now gaslighting the High Court? We don't believe the High Court? The judges?
No. But the reality is that the party's own lawyers told them not to do that they would win the case. Okay, but that's the one point. Let's go back to the more important point that you made. And that is the point about the EHRC report. It's funny how you don't start off on the EHRC report by pointing out that it actually stated that there is no institutional anti-Semitism within the Labour Party. Second of all, you also don't point out that the EHRC state quite explicitly in their report that they did not utilize the evidence in the so-called Labour Party leaked report. This is a report of over 800 pages that was put together in the Labour Party before Keir Starmer became leader, in which it identified a whole series of emails and texts between senior staff members showing them very consciously slowing down on dealing with the disciplinary complaints around anti-Semitism. And in fact, the leader's office interventions were to tell them to speed up and to actually get the whole process moving. Now, the fact that the Labour Party under Keir Starmer did not make that document available to the EHRC, which they knew it was in the public domain, and the fact that the EHRC did not draw on that report in its findings, means that the findings in relation to the leader of the opposition's office are deeply, deeply problematic. And that's why an organization, a civil society organization, is taking the EHRC report and possibly the Labour Party on legal review, specifically because they did not consider all of the relevant evidence and information that was out there on this topic.
Andrew, as a Jewish man yourself and a man of huge political experience and integrity, can I ask you whether you think that the hard left has a problem with Jewish people?
What is the hard left? Explain to me who or what the hard left is. I mean, I'm called of the hard left sometimes. Sometimes I'm called by people who are further to the left of me as some sort of wishy-washy social democrat.
Well,
so when you
Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party wanted to renationalise public utilities at a cost of £200 billion.
That's hard left. Unfortunately.
Well, it certainly wasn't.
The political discourse has therefore moved so much to the right.
It hasn't been on a manifesto of any Labour leader, pre or since.
Suggesting the nationalisation of railways is a position occupied by the centre-left for decades and decades and decades. So the politics you're talking about are actually on such a narrow spectrum. That's the first comment I'd make.
Some commentators have speculated that the cost of the Labour manifesto in 2019 was in excess of £500 billion.
And respond to your question if you want me on your programme. If you want a monologue, don't invite guests.
Well, I've done a lot of listening, Andrew. I have to speak up for my audience too, who did not vote for Jeremy Corbyn.
May I now speak?
Go for it.
Thank you. An absolutely crucial point to understand about all of this is Britain and most other societies in the world have a problem with anti-Semitism, with Islamophobia, and with racism. The reality is that if you look at the YouGov poll that was conducted in 2015 under the leadership of Ed Miliband, who is himself Jewish, the YouGov poll showed that Labour voters constituted amongst the second lowest group identified in the poll who exhibited anti-Semitic views. In a poll that was conducted by the same organization, YouGov, in 2017, it was found that in fact, and this is under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, that in fact, Labour voters, the number of which had increased in that time, exhibited the joint lowest amount of anti-Semitism. So if there was a meaningful investigation into anti-Semitism in Britain or into political parties in Britain, that's what it should have been.